Welcome, David. Welcome back to our to the questions of our last conversation about Chinese high-speed trains.
Thank you so much, Carly, and indeed bring the questions forward because I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Yes, well, first of all, again, David, you are, I would say, one of the foremost international experts on Chinese high-speed trains. And so, yeah, we are very lucky to have you here in this conversation. And again, last time we had a general introduction by you about the Chinese high-speed rail system. And in the meantime, we've got a lot of questions about this miracle of the world, I would say. And so, yeah, let's ask you all of the questions that we have received. So, again, thank
Yes,
you, David.
let's do that.
Okay. Yeah, so let's start with the first question. And some questions almost go into the direction of science fiction, but sometimes science fiction can also become a reality. So let's just ask all of
Yes,
these questions to you.
yes.
So the first question is, would it be possible to ever have a high-speed train link between Europe and China?
Um, Conventional railway exists already. I mean, if it was not for the corona pandemic and then the war afterwards, then it would basically be in operation. And previously, I think we had like a few services every week between Beijing and Moscow, and then previously there were connections into Western Europe. For high speed, it's high speed. I think the routing is a little bit different because conventional rail, you go via the border between Edenhot in China and in Mongolia and Salminute in Mongolia itself, and then crossing it over to Russia. High speed, we have one already built, which is the Eurasian route, which takes you from the coast in Lianyugang in eastern China all the way to Xinjiang. And that in future could be extended many branches across to the rest of like Central and Western Asia. And by that way, we could be ending up in Eastern, Central, and then eventually Western Europe as well. So that's basically the plan. Of course, the situation today makes it a little bit more difficult to realize. But before we had the recent series of events, in fact, China was already looking, and I think Europe was probably also might be potentially interested one way or the other for a high-speed railway link across the continent, which would be something pretty big.
Great. Then the next question would be, how does China actually manage to build so quickly? I mean, they've built, I think, most of their high-speed rail network within a time span of 12 years or so. So my
12,
question,
right?
or
Yeah.
almost right.
Yeah.
And so my question is, how do they do that? Do they have any special machinery? How can they build so quickly?
Um, let's answer this question two ways. I mean, I think in the first stage, which was building the very first high-speed capable line, which in fact was, I don't know if you knew it, but already in late 1999, China was building the first high-speed savvy routes. Until the first long-distance high-speed route was opened, that took over 10 years, in fact. Most people think China's 350 per hour line between Beijing and Tianjin is the world's first, and China's first high-speed line is 350. But there was a lot of preparatory work done before that. A line between Shenyang and Qinhuangdao was the first one to be built. So in the early stages, China was just simply building upon basically every line was like a new experiment. They may have like tried this, that, and the other thing, and then seen, okay, maybe this line it worked better for this one, or the other line had like a better winning design and stuff like that. So I would guess after the first 5 to nearly 10 years, that at that time, I think China then had an idea of like, okay, if we had our own norms and standards, these are the lines and the trains that would actually work the best. And in devising our norms and standards, let's build based on the most winning design combination. And once we have that done, let's unify it. Let's create a unified standard. And then let's just build it that way. And I think what you see now these days is They have quite a lot of experience from from way up in the northeast all the way down to the island of Hainan. So they have a lot of like experience. And basically, they just simply say, okay, we have these norms. They have been, done over so many years. Now we know how to do it right. Let's just build a new line according to these norms. And so, because everything is, I think everything is comparatively more standardized. It just simply means like build stuff, pre-create all of these things in a unified format, lift them up, connect it, and then boom, just make it happen.
So it's
I
like,
think, of course, they have like dedicated machinery. Special, I would say yes, but increasingly unified.
mhm. So it's like it's also part of the Chinese culture, right? To mass produce things and to build giant
Yes,
projects, right? It has been for thousands of
yes.
years, right?
I think especially for high-speed rail, some extent for classic, but also metros. Right now, you're seeing also in terms of a metro system across Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities, but also Chengdu and Shenzhen. They are building like huge subway metro networks, and they pretty much build from like unified like sets. They've seen how it works in other cities and say, okay, let's set that as our norm and let's build it.
Okay, great.
Mm, mm.
So, how safe is it to take the high-speed train in China as of 2023, for example, last year? Are there any statistics or so?
We have not had a crash of the kind we had in Wenzhou in 2011 since that crash itself. And so, I mean, okay, I mean, um, it's it's a huge network. It's probably one of the world's busiest one. To say it's 100% accident free is not realistic. But in terms of like passenger safety, I would say it's one of the safer networks across the planet. And I think also in terms of our railways, they've also put a lot of attention in terms of safety. They did it especially after the Wenzhou crash, but even these days, they're quite serious about safety. And which is why, like for average passengers, if you, like for example, take a picture with one leg just hovering around the edge of the safety line, you will be whistled back because the railways take safety pretty seriously. And I think it's to everyone's benefit. I mean, going across these platforms at the intermediate stations, there are trains that go up to 350 kilometers per hour. So this is no laughing, no kidding matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, is
I
there
think in terms
still?
of like
Mhm.
the statistics, I think there is a unique Chinese way to like measure statistics, and it's what we call in Mandarin 安全生产, and that basically means safe production. The idea behind safe production is basically accident-free workdays. And usually you see a railway, recently built railway like establishments, institutions with at least hundreds, if not thousands of days of accident-free running. So they take it quite seriously. The numbers are varied nationwide, but I would hazard a guess they are comparatively more solid ones. And they're the ones that a heavy-duty network and a safe heavy-duty network like China needs.
So it's I would perhaps almost or as safe as taking the trains in Europe or so, you would say, right?
Yes,
On that
yes,
level,
yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, great. Um, is there still a little stigma in China that taking the airplane is like more fashionable than taking the high-speed train also, do you think?
This stigma goes in like two ways. I mean, first of all, in terms of like realistic mileage. I mean, okay, if you like the more Greta of people who would basically never fly, then I think if you take the railway train from say between Urumqi to Xiamen or between Qiqihar, which is even more north than Harbin, to Hong Kong, then that's pretty much for you. But for people who are like so-called time sensitive, then I think they would fly between, say, Harbin and Hong Kong. But I mean, in terms of like regular routes, like say between Beijing and Shanghai, um, any stigma is kind of like gone when you realize that on the tarmac you're going to be delayed. Of course, high speed actually, to some extent, meant that tarmac delays are actually less a thing now because previously the airports were just chock full of people, and the railways couldn't help up because they had no high speed. So in terms of that, to some extent, the railways made the airliners a little bit more punctual, but still, I mean, flying by plane, it's between Beijing and Shanghai, I would much more choose the railway for a few reasons, including practical ones. On board a train, there is no 15 minutes rule when you cannot use the toilet or use a laptop. And of course, on board a train, you can move around freely, get food at the dining car, and you don't have to be fixed to like a 20-minute, feeding schedule almost, like you would be at 35,000 feet up in the air.
So it's just much more convenient, right, to take the high-speed train. Right.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Mm. So the next question is more like one of these science fiction questions.
Which is
And
not so much science fiction, I hope.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it does make sense. So, but well, the question goes, was there ever an idea to build a high-speed train line from India or from China to India, digging through the Himalaya mountain range? Because actually they're neighbors, right? India and China,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they're the
Yes.
two most populous countries in the world, right? So, mhm.
And the two countries that really do the most infrastructure. I mean, I've had even on the web, on social media, I connect myself often with the Indian Rail community, and I see that, problems that we have in China and even in Switzerland, like say S-Bahn suburban transport. These are problems that India faces every single day as well. And I think that the a term which is familiar with the Swiss Kapazitätsengpässe, the capacity bottlenecks. This is a problem in Switzerland. This is a problem in China. Guess what? This is also quite a serious problem in India. As for the railway link, it's not going directly to New Delhi, but China's routing it first via Nepal. Eventually, via Nepal, I think there would be continued connections to South Asia. Right now, the China to Nepal line is increasingly taking shape and form. I don't know when they're going to start building it, but tendentially there is some kind of like an interest, and eventually they will start, if anything, going from China to Nepal first, and then eventually from Nepal to the rest of South Asia.
Which could be great for
Yes,
Nepal, right? Because it could be
yes,
a connector, right? Mm.
yes, yes. I mean, obviously, this being very hilly terrain, I mean, building a 350 kilometer per hour line, that would be a little science fiction, but I would say one railway line is better than none. So I mean, in terms of that, let's be realistic.
Mhm. Um, is there an idea to build a high-speed train line to the island of Hainan? I mean, on Hainan itself, there is already a
Yeah,
high-speed line, right, which goes
right.
around the island, but maybe a bridge or a tunnel or so from the mainland to the island?
You've actually gone into one of these things that I've put a lot of time in. I mean, of course, not in terms of me taking part in building it, but in terms of researching it. And this is one of those tricky maritime crossings where it's like, oh, on the surface, it's just a few miles. But actually, these, this narrow strait of water is quite troublesome to build a bridge or a tunnel. There is one future-proofed in the future. What they're doing right now is they're building a new high-speed line to the northern and southern ports. And instead of like moving the railway train on board the ferry, passengers will be asked to leave the train and change on board a high-speed, vessel. So they will have to leave the train and then take a high-speed vessel across the Zhonghai Straits from where they can connect onward to Hainan. Hainan also will be part of like already right now it's part of like a separate immigration policy, not totally different, but like many countries can go to Hainan visa free, not so much for the rest of the mainland. And also, eventually, they'll be thinking of a specific tax system for Hainan. So I think in terms of that, there's also the administrative parts of like connecting Hainan with the rest of mainland China. So those are also challenges. In the latest plans I'm aware of, they have already future-proofed an eventual direct connection, be it undersea or in terms of a mega bridge across the straits. But what they're doing right now is they're first interested in building the high-speed connections to the two ports and then seeing how things happen.
I've recently taken the train from Zurich to Vienna, and I mean within Europe they are not so far from each other. Actually, those two cities, and the train went through the Alps, through Innsbruck, and then Salzburg, and finally to Vienna, and it simply took ages. I mean, it was a nice view or so, but it took several hours. I don't know, maybe 8 hours or even more or so. And I was always thinking that in China they would just build a high speed route which maybe take 2 hours or so. I don't know. So actually, my question to you is, so how long would a high speed train trip from Zurich to Vienna, possibly through Munich, and for example also from Zurich to Paris take if we would build comparable high-speed lines like in China?
Um, I mean, actually, you've come across this line, which I've actually been fortunate to take in 2014, although in two legs. The first one with my wife was Zurich main station to Salzburg, and then after a few days connecting from Salzburg to Vienna. I remember the railjet went only up to 230 kilometers per hour for most of the stretch outside of Switzerland. Inside Switzerland, obviously a little bit slower as well. Um, it depends. I mean, this is not flatland. You have the Arlberg, you have the mountains as well, and you also have quite hilly topology in Switzerland as well. Um, 350 across the whole thing would be a little bit difficult, but I think in China, I think if it was built that way, I think maybe it's gonna be maybe 5 or 6 hours or so, at least on a conservative count. That would be a little bit closer between Zurich and Vienna. And I think also the routing as well, because some of these lines have been built since pretty much the beginning of railway time and have not seen a major routing. I mean, to divert this a little bit, in Switzerland, they're thinking of a direct line between Zurich and Aarau at 250 kilometers per hour, which is going to be super straight, compared to the the existing meandering route, which goes around that part. So, yeah, I mean, China isn't all about 350. It's also about straightened lines, and I think that too is like an element. For France, I think we shouldn't see too much of a shortening of travel time in France itself because it already was built for 350 kilometers per hour. The TGV Luria, I think. In Switzerland, though, it's a question of like, can you speed Zurich to Basel up faster? And short of building like a NEAT for that part, the answer is no. But whether or not we'll have a passenger NEAT for the rest of Switzerland ex Gotthard, that I think people will have to decide at the ballot box.
And in China, they have dedicated tracks, right, for all high-speed
Yes,
trains. So there's
yes,
only
pretty
high-speed
much all
trains running
dedicated.
on them, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mm. Maybe Europe would need such dedicated lines as well, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of work and cost a
Yep,
lot, right?
yep.
Mm. Yeah. So yes, let's go to the next question. So maybe a question to you personally.
Yes, yes.
Which high-speed train route is the most scenic, let's say in China, in your opinion?
This is going to be one of the most difficult questions that I'm going to answer, be that China or be that Europe, because every line is so different. I would like to answer it in the way of like, which is the railway route I most enjoy. I think in terms of enjoyment of a particular line, it doesn't have to be a familiar route. It's just simply a line that I think it's gonna be pretty cool. And I would like, you know, of the many lines that would be part of that list, I would say Beijing to Harbin via Chengde and Shenyang for the simple fact that it goes through lots of mountainous territory, but also a little bit of flatland hilly terrain. And it's really like one of these it like you pass through a tunnel and suddenly you go, it's like a very different place. And then it's like the variations in scenery that make the line special to me. The second line will be the one from Beijing to Hong Kong. Again, I mean, in the south, you get like 25 degrees in January. In the north, it's freezing up north. So in the south, you still have everything green right next to the border with Hong Kong. In the north, it's all trees have lost their, leaves except for the evergreens. So this is, I would say these two lines would be the most unique ones.
So you can literally take the train without changing anything and go from a cold environment to a warm one, right? So it's
Obviously you have to be well dressed. I think that goes without saying.
mhm.
So always bring a nice suitcase with you.
Mhm. Good. Another science fiction question.
Yep.
Is it true that there are high-speed train routes that run through deserts?
The closest to that would probably be the line that goes to Xinjiang. When it was opened, it was like one of the showcase lines. Because this was very new territory, I think that line, in terms of routing, it went through some areas which were quite volatile, and as a result, they had to make in some regions, some parts like major changes, and they're building a parallel line to that, which would not go via Xi'an, but would go via Wuwei from Lanzhou and join the main line all the way to Xinjiang to Urumqi. But yes, it goes through some very challenging terrain, pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't say completely all sand, but yes, lots of heavy crosswinds as well. In terms of desert railways, China has quite a few, especially in the northwest and the west. And these, I think, would be as much for people as would also be the case for cargo. And China wants to keep on building these because the way I personally see this is they don't want to have one hyper-connected East and the West forgotten. And I think it doesn't make sense. I mean, in the time that Beijing and Tianjin are potentially thinking of a fifth high-speed line, you don't want the Northwest and the West to feel isolated and alone. It doesn't geographically make much sense. So, yep, the planners still want to see a little bit more development in the West and in the central parts of China as well.
Okay, great and
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so, which route would you recommend for tourists who travel to China for the first time and want to experience the high-speed trains? Are there any super
Ooh.
easy, routes that newbies could take?
This really depends on which part of China you're coming into. I mean, the two megacities, Beijing and Shanghai. For Beijing, I would easily say Beijing to Tianjin Intercity Railway. That's going to be an easy one done within 30 minutes. Featuring, of course, the newest railway station in Beijing, used activated Yizhuang Station. It's also the first 350 km per hour line for China and the first line in the world where trains actually did run at the full 350. For Shanghai, I would say do an outbound journey on the Beijing to Shanghai high-speed railway line as far as Nanjing, and then on the way back take the intercity high-speed line, which goes through the city stations, and then you can see the dimensions of the cities. You can see the different designs of the stations, and you can see how cities are building at the outskirts to the extremes. Like at Suzhou North Railway Station, you look south and you see that's a city that's being expanded. And then on the way back, when you take the intercity route, which is still pretty fast, but not 350, I would say about 300 or so, you go through the central Suzhou station, and then you see pretty much everything in the city center. And you just simply get an idea of how this mass urbanization in this part of like Eastern China is happening. And I think for these two megalopolises, Beijing and Shanghai, these two lines or collection of lines are a good place to start you off with. If you're really intrepid, You could try some other lines as well, like say the third high-speed line between Shanghai and Nanjing. But the first two are already quite a classic.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Um, we've been into that question a little bit before already, but maybe let's still ask it another time.
Yep.
So, like, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the two major, let's say, long distance transport modes in China? So, between high-speed trains and airplanes. When would you recommend to take the high-speed train, and when would you recommend to take the airplane?
I mean, if time is not a problem, I think you could access pretty much all of mainland China by high speed, I think. I mean, okay, I mean, some parts don't have high speed, like say Tibet, but the rest, I would say, mostly high speed is okay. But if time is of the essence, I would say flying makes sense beyond, I think, 1,500 kilometers. So Beijing to Shanghai still makes a lot more sense by rail. The two complement each other if you're in a real rush, because apart from like really hellish climate days, like when there is fog and snow and blizzards, I mean, even if you are out of railway tickets, you can still fly between these. I mean, the advantage of flying, of course, is shorter travel times, but it doesn't factor in the extra long wait at security. It doesn't factor in the fact that some airports are in the middle of nowhere looking at you dashing, and it doesn't factor in, or I think actually, just today I was looking on social media about people who say that Pudong Airport is just too ginormous, too huge. Um, the disadvantage about the railway trains is that they're so popular they're a victim of their own success, and they sometimes sell out pretty quickly. And so because people have found a solution which is more affordable to some extent, more reliable, and also I have to go back to my 15 minutes rule. The fact that on a train you can use the toilets at any time, you can use laptops at any time, and you can go to the dining car to ask for food or scan your QR code and get food at any time. Stuff that you don't get on a plane, not even first class. I mean, on a plane in first class, the fact that you're traveling in first class doesn't grant you privileges to use a toilet for the first 15 minutes. So,
Yes, true,
mm,
absolutely.
mm, mm.
So now maybe a little bit a longer question. I mean, we all know that high-speed trains cause less emissions by distance compared to airplanes, I would say. And so the question is that I mean, airplanes from the US, I mean, they obviously, when they arrive in China, they arrive from the east, right? So they, I mean, naturally Beijing and Shanghai and all of the coast basically is mostly on the east, right?
Yes.
And so that's of course the nearest airports for them. But that arrive from Europe, I mean, they come from the western side, and would it make sense that, for example, airplanes from Europe would arrive not in Beijing or in Shanghai, but maybe in a western city like Xi'an or Kunming or so? And then people would just
Yep.
switch to high-speed trains and travel, do their second part like that? Or
Geographically, sorry, I mean, geographically speaking, Xi'an makes perfect sense because Xi'an is already an established rail and air hub, and is already well connected by metro, by air, and by classic and high-speed rail. Having said that, Xi'an, I think, would be ideal because the rail hub in Xi'an, we are getting two new railway stations being built, Xi'an East and Xi'an South, and Xi'an North already, by the way, is huge, and so is the expanded Xi'an main station. When you have the new East and South stations built and pretty much put into service, Xi'an would make competition and it would make sense in terms of air to rail transports. So I think eventually that might be an option. Of course, in China, the top tier cities are, of course, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. And sorry, and I think probably the authorities want to develop these, but I think also in terms of like second tier international hubs, I think Xi'an is pretty much, I would place it on the top of a list because it's got the history, it's got its geography in the dead center of the country. And I think strategically, geospatially, as well as in terms of its recognition, it makes sense.
Okay, and basically, well, the airplane carriers they would need to, well, just land in Xi'an then instead
Yes,
of Beijing or Shanghai or so from Europe, right?
right.
And it
That
would
could
be
be a
easy to
green
change. It
alternative.
need to be
Yes.
easy to change from airport to high-speed train station, right? Is
Yes.
that the case in Xi'an? Do you know that?
In Xi'an at the moment, you still have to use the metro, but it's not too far away, and I guess eventually, I think it would be a case of it making sense to build a railway station there. And it's not like it's not happening. Wuhan has its new rail hub, one of the newest rail hubs being built in combination with an expanding Tianhe airport. At Shanghai Hongqiao, they have a new, of course, they have an existing railway station and an airport. Shanghai Pudong Station is getting Shanghai East Railway Station. And so the tendency to combine air and rail in mega hubs has existed, and I think hopefully will continue to exist. And one of these days, we may see Xi'an on top of that list as well, I hope.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Um, What is the easiest way for foreigners to buy Chinese high-speed train tickets? How would you recommend to buy these tickets for somebody who doesn't understand Chinese, for example?
Well, first of all, I'd like to make an official Big Mike announcement that I don't work for the Chinese Railways, but I would recommend China Railway 12306 for a few reasons. First of all, it's the official railway ticketing channel. It's official. And it's not because it's official, I say this. It's because once I was waiting in queue at a ticket office, and some guy had been using a third-party booking website, and there was a freak ticketing error, and the guy couldn't travel, and he held up the line. And so it was like a reminder to me. It's like, oh, maybe in future I would just have to buy direct. And also because China Railways 12306 has an English language version, and you can work it with a non-Chinese passport, and you can use your email address to verify your contact details and no longer a Chinese telephone number. I mean, with that, I think it makes a lot more sense if you book like using the direct railways, app in China, just like in Switzerland. I would tendentially buy well, of course, I mean, when I come back, I'm not going to buy rail tickets. I'll just get a GEA, like a 1 year or, travel pass. But if I was an occasional train user, I would probably buy Zurich to Geneva via the SBB mobile app. So I think it's the same in China. I think it's like if you buy direct, then the chances are that you're going to be in comparatively safer hands, and it's going to be the real deal, I guess.
So basically, what you've mentioned before was that you could just go to the Apple App Store or the
Yes,
Google Play Store, and there's an
yes,
app called, I just read it here, I think it's called Railway 12306, right?
that's right. And the rest of the world is like wondering why did they pick these five numbers out of like a magic hat? Let's give you some context. In China, these five-digit short numbers are used by public institutions for like a toll-free hotline, or at least a common use hotline. Like for example, if I wanted rail information, I would call 12306 from my iPhone. If I wanted to check my immigration status or have immigration related questions, I would call 12367. If I wanted to check stuff with like the weather reports agencies, it's another 12 something or the other. So 12306 is in the Chinese telephone system, the official phone number of the Chinese National Railways. And because 12306 as numbers can be read by pretty much everyone on the planet, it makes a lot of international sense. And the railways have quasi like trademark slash commodified it. The info desk at most stations will bear the same railway telephone number, 12306. The railway booking app is called 12306. It's become like a railway trademark of its own. So yes.
Okay, well, great to know. I didn't know
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
yeah, now I do. Thanks.
Yes.
So, how many hours before my train or before my high-speed train journey should I arrive at the railway station? What do you suggest? I mean, for airports, it's like I would say you should be there 2 hours before, right? Usually.
Yes. If you're traveling international non-Pudong, 3 hours. If you're traveling international Pudong, 4 hours. For the railway stations, it's 0.5 hours. 30 minutes is more than enough.
Wow. Okay.
But
Super
during
convenient.
the really crazily busy peak travel periods, the days when over 20 million people travel by rail in just one day, I would advise 40 minutes or 45 minutes. But for pretty much the rest of the year, I would say 30 minutes is more than enough. The gates at most stations close about 3 to 5 minutes before departure, but I wouldn't risk it. I would just say the moment the gates are open, hop in and board.
What days would those be that are so highly frequented that you mentioned before? It's like Chinese New Year, right? That's
Chinese New
one of these
Year's,
days.
most people are like China's a huge nation and we're gonna see like billions, if quasi trillions on the move. In fact, Chinese New Year's is not the dates when the new 24-hour or 1 day travel record for passenger journeys dispatched in 1 day are made. Those are more likely May break, October break, and these are because these breaks take at least 5 days. People take the train to longer distances if they don't leave the country. Or actually, you know, we have options to Laos and to Mongolia. But going back on track, um, because they have relatively more time to play, to get around, to factor that in on their journeys, the first and the last days of these week-long breaks are going to see a lot of people, you know, rush to the station to get to their long-distance getaway, be it like Jiuzhaigou, or be it like Sipsompana or somewhere else, or Hainan. It's just so during these days, during the national holidays, rather than Spring Festival, are we going to see crazy amounts of people at stations?
And they are usually in May as well as in October. It's usually
Yes,
at the
yes,
beginning of the month, right? At the start
yes,
of the
yes,
month, maybe
yes,
for one
yes.
week or something
For
like
about a
this,
week, yes, yes,
or a
yes,
week. Yeah.
yes.
Good. Yeah, then another question which we've also discussed a little bit before already is it possible for non-Chinese speakers to take the high-speed train without any help? Or, I mean, if you are like a YouTuber and you want
Yep.
to travel China and you don't speak Chinese, do you think it's easy to take the high-speed trains like that?
The answer is generally yeah or yes, sometimes yain. I mean, most stations are, straightforward and they usually have bilingual signage. Um, if your station is a by the wayside little league station where there's no English and some of these stations still exist and the staff can't really like, of course we have like Google Translate, Bible to translate, but for these stations, it can be a little bit more difficult, which is also where I come into play because I've been standardizing rail English since 2013 and getting, people across the railways to improve their level of English competency. And so I hope that both nationwide and also in terms of my personal engagements, that I'm here to serve, people coming into China taking this green mode of transport. And I hope eventually that we're going to see more and more English competent staff. I think it's really happening because last year in August, when I went to Hangzhou Station to train folks about rail English for ticketing. 2 months afterwards, a meme, like a viral meme came, a viral video came of someone who was part of my lessons and who could like help passengers, rebook their tickets with ease, and all instructions were given pretty much completely in English. So I think with China reopening after the corona pandemic, and especially with more and more visa-free countries being able to make it here, I think the incentive to improve English in the rail system is going to be more and more felt. And I hope any nine in this current system is going to become a ya. Any like language gaps that exist at the moment, I hope they're going to be filled in going into the future.
So it is a resounding yes, and it will even get easier from what I understand, right?
Generally,
So,
yes. I mean, if you're like Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, I think the answer is more than likely yes.
mhm. So now we come to a service that I would say is unheard of in Europe,
Yes.
in European railway, I mean, in the railway system. So the question is it true that you can order food on your high-speed train trip that will be cooked in a restaurant of a railway station at one of the intermediate train stops and will be delivered to your seat in the train? So, for example, if you take the high-speed train from Beijing to Shanghai, and for example, you pass by Nanjing station or so, can you order local Nanjing food and have it delivered at the train stop in Nanjing?
I will give you three answers. The straightforward answer is a simple yes, based on most stations. And I mean, these are the hub stations, like, say, for example, Shanghai, Jinan, Beijing, and stuff like that. Quite a number of these stations. The second answer is it depends in terms of food. Is it going to be Nanjing Fair in Nanjing? Hopefully. But you do have like some choice. Of course, you have the usual fallback options, KFC, McDonald's, and stuff like that, and also a local Chinese food, dumplings and stuff. I think maybe. If you ask me personally, I don't even use the service. I've used it once, but I've never used it, and that's because I'm a very, very picky eater. I mean, sometimes I would order my Subway sandwich or burger with very specific, like, instructions: add this, don't add this, don't do that. And in the end, I tend to be like, the rest of social media around me is like freaking out and says China's living in the 22nd century with this service. And I'm like, oh, cool, but I hardly ever use it, which is very odd. But it happens.
Okay, and
Yeah.
I mean, this basically means that um, on many journeys on the high-speed rail in China, you have access to McDonald's and KFC or yeah,
And
things like
Starbucks,
that.
I think the
Yeah.
usual suspects are the usual suspect at more like it stations. I mean, you can already see how well a city or a station is doing by the international brands. The most basic stations that want to become more international have a McDonald's and or a KFC. From the moment they have a Starbucks, they become seriously international. And I say this because Shijiazhuang Station now has a Starbucks, or at least, I think, not two, but at least one. And I found it out in early January this year. It's like, wow, this is pretty international. If a station has a Subway or has as much like has Burger King, has everything else, like say Beijing South or Shanghai Hongqiao, then it's really international, I think. So it depends, but most stations will also have local fare, which is usually dumplings and some other things like that. So Lanzhou La Mian, the noodles, they're also pretty much in demand.
So I would say if you want to have an epic McDonald's burger, you should come to China, take the high-speed
Yeah.
train, and order it on the train and have it delivered at one of the stations. But of course, you should
Yes,
also
but
taste the Chinese food, which is usually much better.
Yes,
Yeah.
also McDonald's in China is actually one of the places where the newest technology is actually deployed. You can actually order via a smartphone app and like say, I'm gonna be at the place, give me like a burger and it's gonna like spit out like your burger's waiting for you in like basically they're like places where they store your food and they give you like a QR code or your number and you just simply scan that and your food comes out.
Wow.
It's,
Okay,
it's,
I will try that next time.
another thing at the McDonald's, which I thought was just insane, was that at least in the English language interface, which I use pretty often, there's an option to pay in local currency, and there's an option via the app to pay in foreign currency. I've never seen that work.
Oh,
It's like, wow.
okay.
Of course, for fellow Swiss, there is no twint support for payment, but it gets pretty close.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So another science fiction question, I would say,
Yes.
and I mean there has been a lot of hype about hyperloop,
Yep.
especially from Elon
That's a good way to
Musk,
put it. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and also Swiss universities have been competing at some of the competitions that Elon Musk has hosted in the United States. But recently I've heard that he has, I think, kind of canceled this project or so,
Yes.
unfortunately.
I've also heard this.
But I've heard that China has its own version of Hyperloop, or at least its own projects that are similar. And do you know anything about that? Have they also been canceled, or are they still being developed?
I think as a concept or plan, it's still pretty much close to the drawing they're close to the drawing board. In terms of faster trains, what you're most likely to see first is a 400 kilometer per hour train. And by that I mean the railway train that goes from Chengdu to Chongqing using the middle routing. And that line has been built for 350, future-proof for but future-proofed for 400 kilometers per hour. As I think I said that in my talk. Next up would be maglev, and maglev we would see on the so-called red routes, which you remember from my talk, and these are the big guys like say Beijing, Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai, and stuff like that. Shanghai to Chengdu and Chongqing. And these are the places where we might be able to see maglev. Hyperloop, it's going to come after maglev. Maglev already is quite quick. The 400 kilometer per hour trains, that's conventional wheeled. Maglev is about 600 or so, and Hyperloop is around 1,000. Hyperloop, if they're going to make it, comes after maglev. And maglev, I would say, because the network of routes, the red, blue, and yellow ones are for 2035. I personally would not be surprised if we had a Chinese maglev at 600 by around 2035. I would not be surprised. As for Hyperloop, around mid-century, if they do this, it may be an option. I don't have any. I do not have any fixed dates, but if it was around mid-century or later, that would not be unrealistic.
Cool. Looking
Yeah.
forward. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. As you know, in Switzerland, we have our own railway or yeah, train
Yeah.
manufacturer, or at least
Yeah.
one of them, which is called the Stadler Rail.
Yes.
And they also ship to other countries abroad, of course. And so I just wanted to ask you whether you know of any Stadler Rail compositions that are running in China.
My answer to this is twofold. I'm not aware of that personally, but if they had one in China, I would not be surprised. It goes the other way as well. I mean, I'm not aware of any CRC trains in Switzerland, but if there was one, I would not be surprised. I mean, but I don't think they make for majorities in either market. I think in Switzerland, Stadler Rail is pretty much the big kahuna, the same as CRC in China. In third markets, maybe they will find some competition. I mean, China is exporting CRC trains to Laos, Vietnam, not Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. But maybe Vietnam. I remember Hanoi has like a a subway line which is like built and quite influenced by the ones we have in China. And Stadler Rail has exported its train sets to the rest of the world as well. And it's also metro. For example, the new rolling stock in the Glasgow subway is pretty much from Stadler Rail. So I think in third markets, then the individual rail car manufacturers will export their own stuff to these destinations.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think we've already come to the end, or actually we still have one more question, and I
Yes.
think to wrap it up, we may end our session with a literal meme question about
Yep.
trains. And so in Switzerland, we have the old Gotthard locomotive, which was named after a crocodile because it's
Yes.
green or it can be brown or green, but it looks like a crocodile. And
Yes.
so I just wanted to ask you, are there trains in China historically that have been named after animals, creatures, anything?
I think the earliest train in China was called the Rocket of China, but that was more a thing rather than like say a crocodile. But I guess in the modern era, I think for that you look to southwestern China in Chengdu, home of the pandas, although pandas are also in nearby Shanxi as well, but in the south, I would guess. But southern Shanxi. But anyway, in Chengdu, they have suburban trains which are branded as like Panda Express. And so whilst that train just has the image of pretty cute, pretty cute panda emblazoned on the rolling stock itself. I mean, the front of a train isn't particularly designed to look like a cute panda, but there you have the element of that. And I think because Sichuan is known in particular as some kind of panda heaven, you have all of these. In terms of a panda, they're very visible in the station of Foping, which is in southern Shanxi, which hosts a panda. I think if it's not a base, at least it's a tourist attraction with pandas in the wild, about half an hour away from the railway station. And you go to Foping station, and there are panda elements throughout the entire station. And even in the billboards nearby, you will see literally a panda hugging a billboard. So it's there. And I think in China, if anything, the national treasure, the panda, is featured one way or the other on trains and at stations. Maybe not nationwide, but there are certain places.
Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. I have to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
And yes, of course, recently there was also this new computer game or video game called Black Myth Wukong, named after
Aha,
this
yes, yes, yes.
character Sun Wukong, the Monkey King,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So maybe in the future there may be a Monkey King train, Wukong
Hmm.
train, who knows?
Yes,
But
yes. I hope if there's a Wukong train, it's gonna run on the Eurasian route to like Central and Western Asia, just the same way as the Wu Chenggen Classic journey to the West.
it's the new version of camels. Yeah, the
Ah,
new version.
something like that as well. Yes,
Yes. Yeah, that would be epic, a Wukong train.
yes.
And I think with that, I thank you very much, David, for
Thank you,
answering
Carly.
all these questions.
Thank you,
And
everyone. Yes,
yeah, let's see you another time. And
yes.
thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye,
Thank
David.
you. You too. Bye bye. Bye bye.